Do we have any jazz music?
Yes, isn't that, can y'all hear it?
Yes, we can.
Oh, it's Christmas jazz. It's the season. Welcome, Mr. Green. Welcome. Welcome to the Charlotte Post Publishing Company C-Suites conversation. Today we have Maurice Mo Green, Executive Director with Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. Once again, welcome to the Charlotte Post Publishing Company. We are the publisher of each week, the Charlotte Post and the Triangle Tribune newspaper, serving Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and Cary, North Carolina. We are the voice of the Black community. Let me introduce you to our team this morning. My name is Linda Johnson, and I am one of the hosts. Along with me, we have the pleasure of having Mr. Gerald O. Johnson, our publisher and CEO, with us. It's always a pleasure. As well, along hosting, we have Michelle Spears and Herbert White, our editor-in-chief. We'd like to thank you once again for joining us this morning on our C-Suite conversation. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Michelle Spears.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning and welcome. Please open your chat and Q&A windows, which are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and the diagram has been provided for you. During this webinar, if you have any questions for the presenter, please type them in the Q&A window only, and they will be answered throughout the presentation. The chat window will be used for our team to communicate various resources of today's webinar and ways you can support the Charlotte Post and Triangle Tribune with links directing you to the websites, subscriptions, newsletters, sponsorships, and donations. Thank you for joining us today. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to the publisher of the Charlotte Post Publishing Company, Gerald O. Johnson. Gerald?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank all of you for joining us this morning. A quick historical background of the Charlotte Post. We've been around since 1878. Well, I haven't been around since 1878, but the Post has been around since 1878. Starting off in the AME Zion Church and became secular in the 1920s, and been in the Charlotte community ever since then. It's been in my family since 1974 when my father purchased the publication, and my brother and I took it over in 1986 after my father passed. And since then, we have been moving forward. We have a publication in the Raleigh area as well as the Durham area. And the publication is not just paper, but now we are slowly but surely becoming mostly digital, as well as other avenues of getting the news out to the public. And I could go on and on with the history of this, but that's not why we're here. We're here to get the life story of Mr. Maurice Mo Green. And to get that process started, I'm going to turn it over to the Chief Executive Editor. If you get that right, the Chief Executive Editor, Herb White.
Thank you, Gerald, and welcome everybody, and happy holidays to all of you. I am Herb White, Editor-in-Chief at the Post.
I like Chief Executive Editor.
I know. It's your prerogative, even if it's not totally accurate, but it's okay. Nonetheless, the C-Suite is our 2021 project in terms of expanding our knowledge and experience to helping folks understand the background and achievements and accomplishments of CEOs of major North Carolina institutions, whether it's business or the education community, or in the instance of Mr. Green here, a little bit of education, a little bit of philanthropy, and it's all good. And so we will not dilly-dally any longer. We're going to just jump right on into the conversation. And this is our last C-Suite conversation for 2021, and it has been wildly successful. And thank you to all of our participants for making it so. So, Gerald, let's just jump on into the conversation with Mo Green.
Let's get it started. Mr. Green, thank you for agreeing to participate in this. And really, this conversation is about this is your life. And we want to get right into it with your life. And starting off with, tell us where you were born.
Great. Before I start with that, I do want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to a fruitful time together. So I was born in New York.
What part of New York, sir?
Yeah, so Queens, and lived in St. Albans, New York.
Okay, now tell us about with it growing up in New York and sort of take us through your years of growing up in New York and where else you ended up in your childhood days.
Absolutely, be happy to. So born in New York, mother and father and a older brother, and lived there until I was about 9 or so years old. My family was blessed to have a few family businesses, and so worked in the family businesses even as a young child before moving to Georgia. And so we moved to Bibb County, which includes Macon, Georgia, when I was a little over 9 years old, and grew up there through high school and stayed there until I came to North Carolina to go to college.
All right, tell us a little bit about your high school days. I want to get into your education in terms of did you do any sport types of things? Let us know a little bit about growing up in your high school days.
Absolutely. So I went to Southwest High School, was a graduate of the class of 1984, and was certainly involved in a number of different activities while in high school. I was on, so I would say I was on a football team, but they weren't looking for me to do anything to help the team be victorious. Annual staff was probably one of the biggest things that I did. We put out a 300 plus page annual every year. And I was the editor-in-chief by my senior year in high school. Was involved in many, many clubs and activities. You name it, I likely tried to get involved in it. I also was blessed and fortunate to have some wonderful teachers who certainly gave me a great foundation and great encouragement to apply to some top ranked schools. And so that certainly is what certainly laid the groundwork, along with I cannot ever forget my mother, who did such a great job of also raising my brother and me after my father passed away within a year of us moving to Georgia. And so certainly she had a great impact on my education, and certainly even through my high school education.
Going through high school there, what was your interest in terms of education, in terms before you even got into college? What did you feel like you wanted to major in and become?
Yes, sir. So I would say even before I knew much about being a lawyer, when I was young and even in New York, many folks would say to me, Maurice, you like to argue, you would be a great lawyer. And so that stuck. I did like to debate, and and so when people said I would be a great lawyer, I thought, sure, why not? And so really sort of guided my life towards doing that. Found out probably, well, first I would say when my father passed, our family attorney really came in and I thought did from a perspective of a pretty young child, did this marvelous job of working with my mother and trying to help guide her on how to move forward with her life and various legal issues. And so I thought, gosh, this seems like the kind of person I would want to be. And so really decided, from there that I absolutely would be a lawyer. Found out years later that it would take 7 years of college and law school to do that. But decided that's exactly what I wanted to do. So that's how I went about ultimately becoming a lawyer. Obviously, more research as I got older and found out there are different types of lawyers, and decided that maybe I would want to be a trial type lawyer, since that would give me the chance to argue cases and represent clients in front of juries and judges, etc.
And so you ended up did you go to Duke initially coming out of high school?
I did. Yes, sir. I went to Duke University and ultimately had a double major in political science and in economics, and stayed at Duke to go to law school there as well.
Okay. Herbert?
So now, when you graduate Duke Law, it's obviously a very prestigious school, and you get started professionally. Was there a pathway that you envisioned, or were you kind of just looking at it from the standpoint of any spot's a good landing spot to launch a career?
Yeah, so I actually, at the time that I went into law school, I would have told you that I probably would end up back in Georgia. And it would not have surprised me for me to end up in Atlanta. Would not have been a surprise if I said, I think I'll end up trying to be in a law firm where I can be a litigator. Really started, through law school, trying to find out more about those opportunities. As it turns out, I got a tremendous opportunity to be a summer associate with a law firm in North Carolina. As a Smith Helms Mollison Moore law firm, which is one of the larger law firms in the state at the time. And that really started me on this amazing journey of, thinking about practicing law here in North Carolina. I did spend my second summer of after law school in Atlanta and worked in 2 law firms there. But I was really convinced that North Carolina would be the place to be. My now wife was from North Carolina, and she said she's going to be in North Carolina. So I said, well,
So you're going to be in North Carolina.
I think I'm going to be in North Carolina too. That law firm, there was a gentleman there, Doug I, who also suggested to me, along with others, that maybe I could do a judicial clerkship. Is where you spend 1 year to 2 years supporting a judge in the judge's work. And he, as well as folks from the law school, suggested that I do that. He had a recommendation of someone who I might do a clerkship with. And as it turns out, was successful in getting that clerkship. So I did a clerkship in the Middle District of North Carolina. With a judge named Norwood Carlton Tilley Jr., Federal District Court in the Middle District of North Carolina. And then while in law school, one of my professors, Professor Jerome Culp, actually suggested to me that maybe I should do a second clerkship. And he knew he had someone in mind that I should do the clerkship with, who was actually a judge he had clerked with. And so I was successful in getting a second clerkship, federal clerkship on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which was based in Cincinnati, Ohio, with Nathaniel Jones. And so did those 2 clerkships, and then ultimately came back and actually began practicing law with Smith Helms Mollison.
Wait a minute now, did your wife go with you when you left to go with the second clerkship?
Yes, sir. So we got married in '92. And that's when I was finishing up my first clerkship and going to my second one. And she said, yeah, I'll go with you for a year, but we're going to be back in North Carolina. And at that point, I'd already agreed to join the law firm, Smith Helms. And so, I think she was comfortable with us spending a year in Cincinnati and enjoying our time there.
So now you've got all this experience as a clerk and then in private practice. So under the heading of life comes at you funny sometimes, you wind up with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. And how did that happen? Was it just a job that you heard about, or somebody make a suggestion, or did it just fall in your lap magically? What?
Yes. When I first started with Smith Helms had just gotten the engagement to represent the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education. And so I became one of these brand new associates assigned to be one of the lawyers representing the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education. Now, I certainly represented many, many other clients as well. Did a lot of civil litigation, did some criminal defense as well. But I certainly enjoyed representing lots of different clients. I certainly enjoyed representing the Board of Education. That led ultimately to me becoming a partner in the law firm. And then the Board of Education, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education, decided they had a general counsel before me, a woman named Leslie Winter, and she left. And so they were looking to hire their next general counsel. And I had lots of conversations with lots of folks and really thought, well, maybe this is this amazing opportunity to do lots of different things for one client, if you will, law related. And so decided to apply for that position. So I knew a lot about the Board of Education. It wasn't one of those, let me just sort of see what's out there. I had represented it for a number of years. And so it was really easy then in some ways to make the transition from, being, in the partner in the law firm to representing the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education. And so decided to do that, was successful in getting that position, and yes, made that transition then to that organization.
So how did you continue with your deep felt need to debate and argue? How did that transition with you?
Yes, so certainly, there are lots of issues that the Board of Education has to deal with. If you can just imagine, it is everything imaginable occurs in a school system. And so there were certainly opportunities to work with various other lawyers, to work with folks who were challenging decisions at the Board of Education or its administrators or others had made. So there were plenty of opportunities to engage, if you will, in representing the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education. So I certainly did not, it wasn't the same. I wasn't no longer sort of the lead counsel, in trying cases anymore. But certainly remained involved in, challenging issues and some significant conversations with folk about how we're going to move a particular issue forward or to resolution.
And then from there, you got a promotion, I guess, to along the upper echelon of CMS leadership, and ultimately was a deputy superintendent. What made you decide to jump onto the nuts and bolts of the education side instead of the legal side?
Yeah, so this is where I would say, if you want to talk about life sort of changing for you, I mean, so as you could hear, I sort of thought my life was going to be about doing legal related things. I mean, I could sort of envision myself doing something like becoming, the general counsel of an organization. I could see myself being a law professor or being a judge, doing those sorts of things, all sort of legal related. So the transition from that to school district administrator was a significant change. So if we look back now, several superintendents ago for Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, there was a superintendent, Dr. Peter Gorman, who was interviewed for the position and ultimately hired. Well, I was the staff lead in managing the superintendent search along with an outside search firm and working with the Board of Education. And so he and I had the chance to interact a couple of times as he was going through that process. And he reached out to me after he was hired and asked me to consider shifting gears, if you will. And as we continued the conversations, it led to shifting gears, meaning running the day-to-day operations of the school district. Now, we didn't really know each other. So, I thought, man, he must be a little bit crazy, but I must be a little bit crazy because I'm listening to him. And, all throughout my time as legal counsel, I was so interested in what was happening and why weren't more students, particularly students of color, achieving at levels that I know that they were capable and others knew that they were capable of achieving. And so many folks were so invested in trying to see those improvements. And I thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity for me to do something beyond just being the lawyer for the school system and can be helpful in that regard. And so I said, well, why don't we give it a try? Now, he and I will joke because I said, well, let's not fill the general counsel position so quickly, just in case, we both a few months in say, maybe this wasn't exactly the best decision. But he was invested in me. He encouraged me. And, I felt like we ultimately formed a pretty strong bond. Was very fortunate then to do something like run the day-to-day operations for the school system. And we called the position initially Chief Operating Officer. At that time, the academic side of the house did not report directly to me. But a few months in, he said, Mo, I want you to have essentially everyone reporting directly to you. And so essentially everyone did, and we ultimately decided to call the position Deputy Superintendent.
So what new about yourself in that position did you learn going through that? That's a heavy lift right there. Tell us more about what you learned from that experience.
Well, I would say, and some of these things you pick up a little bit along the way, but it certainly came into full bloom, if you will, when I became COO and then Deputy Superintendent. And that is, you got to have pretty strong core values because folk are going to be coming at you from every vantage point. And if you don't have a good sense of who you are and what you stand for, then you can be easily moved and persuaded to do things differently. As I say, some of that certainly comes through when you're practicing law, but I would say really then developed in that role. I would say another thing certainly that I learned a lot about was the business of education. So when you're sort of the general counsel, you're a step removed from actually having to make the actual decisions about running the school system. When you step into those roles, then you're actually making critical decisions all the time about how to run the school system. And so I really felt like, and I remember when I first was hired into that position, I remember telling, we had a leadership retreat, and I remember telling everyone in that leadership retreat, I'm not going to suggest that I am knowledgeable on all things education, but I'm going to be about the business of learning it just as promptly as I can. And I'm looking to everyone in that room and throughout the school system to help me along in that process. And so I learned a tremendous amount awfully quickly. Some of it is, because you're dropped into the deep end and having to make decisions on the spot, you learn how to make quick decisions, maybe with not all the facts in front of you. You learn, how to gauge and trust people, or figure out people's motives as they're trying to move things forward. And then you also, one thing that I really learned was you have to keep your eye on the prize. What are the goals for the school system? And trying to be sure that you stay true to moving the organization towards those goals. Because when you're trying to run a school system like the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education, every minute of every day, there are things that will pull you away from moving those things forward. There are things that are happening, teachers do certain things, students are involved in certain things, building might have certain issues that heat's not working. There are lots of things that can happen, and you can get to the end of the day and say, well, I managed all those issues, and yet and still you have done nothing really to move the district forward.
Interesting.
So now you make another transition from going from just below the superintendent's chair to the superintendent's chair in another county, Guilford. How much from that CMS experience helped you in the transition to the Guilford job, or was it a totally different world?
Yeah, so I would say that the work that I had done in Charlotte-Mecklenburg prepared me quite well to become the superintendent. Dr. Gorman, really, when he says you're going to run the day-to-day operations of the school system, he meant it. He was spending a tremendous amount of time, externally focused, and he really wanted me to be sort of the lead person internally. And so that gave me a tremendous opportunity to learn a lot and be prepared. Now, a couple of stories that I think are really interesting related to Guilford County Schools. One is, you may recall that I said that I did my first clerkship in the Middle District of North Carolina. It was based in Greensboro, North Carolina. And at the time that I did that clerkship was around the time that school district was actually 3 school systems: Guilford County, Greensboro, and High Point. And it was going through its merger discussions. And I remember thinking, well, I don't know much about school systems, but whoever would want to be superintendent of that would be, you got to be crazy to do something like that. I don't know much, but that's certainly not something I would do. The second thing that I would say is, it was Dr. Gorman who actually said to me, Mo, you need to be a superintendent, and I know where you need to be a superintendent. And so the law in North Carolina had actually changed only a few years prior to allow a non-traditional person, so someone who did not have the education background, to be a superintendent. And so ultimately took Dr. Gorman up on it and applied, and was successful in becoming the superintendent of Guilford County Schools. So it was really at his encouragement that I applied. It's the only place I ever applied to be superintendent. And I think I learned the lesson of never say never about a job, because someone up above might be listening to you.
Yeah. And then, so you did your time, so to speak, with education. And now it's off to a new gig in philanthropy. I take it that they don't necessarily match, but what was that like? And you go from law to education to philanthropy and running one of the biggest philanthropic organizations in North Carolina, if not the United States, at Z. Smith Reynolds.
Yeah, so I knew a little bit about Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation when I was, superintendent of Guilford County Schools, and even prior to that. I reflect back on it now and would say I knew very little about the foundation and the impact that the foundation has had in North Carolina. As it turns out, the woman who I replaced in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools as a general counsel, Leslie Winter, she was the general counsel, she was the executive director for the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, just prior to me becoming the executive director for that organization. And so she came to me, and I'm sure I talked with others as well, but she came to me and said, she's planning to retire and leave that position, and it might be something that I might consider. And so we had a number of conversations and ultimately decided, this might be a really interesting opportunity, because now you're talking about not only trying to make an impact across one school district, but in fact, across the state of North Carolina in a number of different areas. Now, as it turns out, one of the areas that Z. Smith Reynolds had focused on and continues to focus on is public education. So there was at least that bit of a link between what I had been doing in general as the superintendent of Guilford County Schools and the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. But it was another significant shift. And so I remember saying when I announced that I was leaving that, I felt like, even though it's really not true, but I felt like when I was a young kid and was thinking about being a lawyer, I was sort of guiding my path. I shared with folks when I left Guilford County Schools that I'm on a path that's really not of my own making. And so I'm going to be directed as the path allows. And this is where the path is directing that I go. It fit with the core values of the foundation, fit with my core values. The mission of the foundation fit with what I wanted to do. And so it felt like an appropriate next move for me.
Hold on before we go. We got several questions coming in here that I think we need to start getting answered.
Absolutely.
And we're going to start off with, because I got several other things to come up here, but Kathleen Geringer asked, thank you for sharing your journey as a single mother to very smart but a big, busy 16-year-old son who desires to pursue law. What words of advice do you have to motivate his work ethic? He is considering litigation as well, and currently at early college, and attends at early college.
Excellent. Certainly, congratulations. I did not catch the name, but congratulations.
Kathleen Derringer.
Derringer. Congratulations to Ms. Derringer and to her wonderful son. So the things, as I sort of reflect back, I would say, don't narrow yourself too quickly with regards to your studies. So even while you want to be an attorney, and your son wants to be an attorney, and I think that's a wonderful way to go. I find that some of the very best attorneys don't simply say, well, I'm going to do pre-law or something, just particularly law related in college, but rather explore lots of different interests. you know, the best lawyers, I think, have a tremendous knowledge base in a lot of different disciplines, and you know, can really then inform you know, what you might ultimately be interested in ultimately when you become a. Second thing I would say is, you know, there are, you know, and different schools will have different opportunities. If there is something that, you know, like a pre-law society or something like that, you know, then I would encourage, you know, a person to get involved in something like that. If there are opportunities to do internships, you know, with lawyers while in high school, even if it's just moving some documents around, just so you can be in the presence of lawyer and you can perhaps go down to a courthouse and see a case being tried. I would encourage those sorts of, you know, activities you know, as well. Certainly, you know, and it sounds like the son is already doing this. Doing well in school, trying to get as good a grades as one can get, because those will open up opportunities for scholarships and opportunities that may come your way. And then the last thing I'll say is this: be open to mentorship in many different ways and from many different people. You know, so as you perhaps have heard in my journey, I was just able to have a number of different folks pour into me. Some of them were lawyers, others were not. And all, I think, have the ability to really improve your son's life.
Excellent.
Good. Now, let's jump into, well, there's a few questions here by one Roderick Hinton, who is obviously a very curious person. So he's asking me 3 different questions. So the first one that Mr. Hinton has is, how is your years of being in education assisted with the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation and your experience there? And also, he wants to know, how has the pandemic affected your day-to-day decisions for the foundations? So we'll give Roderick 2 questions there, and you can answer them in the order you prefer.
Great. So I'll start with the years in education. How did those help with my work with the foundation? And so I would say to Mr. Hinton, you know, helped in a number of different ways. First of all, as I shared earlier, one of the priority areas for the foundation is public education. And so there's a direct connection between what I was doing before and what we are focused on now. And so, for example, being connected to some of the work around the Leandro litigation, which is the adequacy of funding litigation that's gone on for 20+ years.
Yeah, it's
Well,
forever.
yes, yeah. Well, if you look back at my career, I have been a lawyer, actually a lawyer that represented the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education in Leandro litigation, to a school district administrator, including the superintendent, who ultimately was called as a witness before Judge Manning when he was managing the case, to then now being in philanthropy and being able to suggest to the Board of Trustees, you know, let's consider an opportunity to support an independent consultant that was engaged with by the court, that ultimately led to you know, a decision by the court as to significant dollars that need to go into public education in North Carolina. And so you can see that direct connection between my work there. I would say the other thing that certainly you know, is there with regards to my work would be certainly, you know, trying to be engaged in a number of activities, because I have found when I was superintendent, the more I can be involved in various activities in the community, the more I will learn. And so that has then transferred here as well. Try to be involved in activities and across the state, because that allows me to learn plenty. I could go on, but hopefully those gives a couple of examples there. And then with regards to the pandemic, how has the pandemic impacted the work of the foundation? Yeah, so certainly it's impacted us as far as operations. We moved remotely. We're still largely remotely now. We've allowed each employee to make a decision about whether they will come into the office, but it's flexible. And so most of us are still working remotely on a day-to-day basis. With regards then to substantive sort of grant making, the foundation really sort of poured into where are areas where we can provide support to organizations. So we made some changes on sort of some operational things and how grantees manage their dollars and when they would need to report into us as to how that was happening, to how they would apply for additional dollars, to then how and where we would place grant dollars. And so we decided to certainly do some things that were immediate, like providing funds to food banks, but we also said, we are knowledgeable and know that there are certain sectors that may need additional support. And so let's be sure that we really try to pour into those. And so we did, as opposed to only doing, giving every one of our grantees a certain amount of money. We decided, no, let's really sort of focus in particular areas and pour into them. So there's certainly things that we continue to pay attention to even now, as we're now closing in on almost 2 years of the pandemic, and how we work with our grantees and listen to them and what their needs are as well.
We have a question here from Yvette Townsend Ingram, who wants to know, was there ever an occasion when the community expressed no confidence in the CMS school board? And can that happen such that the entire board is removed? And can you offer an opinion about the superintendent search and best practices?
So if I understand the question correctly, whether there was I'm not sure who would have offered this no confidence vote. Are they saying of the school board themselves?
I guess the community expressing no confidence in the school board.
So, I don't know that there's always contingents of communities that love you and think you're doing a great job, and others that think that you're not. And certainly, so there were certainly folk within the Charlotte-Mecklenburg community that, expressed deep concerns about the direction of the school system. But I don't know that there was, at least while I was there, a sort of community, I don't know what it would be exactly to suggest that there was this sort of community-wide no confidence vote or something of that nature. And then there was a second part of that question, and I want to be sure I hear that again so I can answer it again.
Can you offer an opinion about the superintendent search and best practices?
Yeah, so, I don't know that there are, quote, best practices with regards to superintendent searches. I think that each community has to decide for themselves, particularly in a state like North Carolina, where you do not have to make all of the search process public, as you might have to do in some states. Each community has to decide, when is it important to have superintendent candidates become known to the broader community and allow the broader community to have at least some glimpse into who might ultimately be leading the school system. I thought that Guilford County's process was a good one in the sense that they narrowed it down to the final, I believe it was 2 or 3 individuals. So it was confidential up till they got it to that point. And then there was an opportunity for those individuals to engage with the community so that the board could get some feedback from the community. And I use the community broadly in this context because it included both internal school system employees, parents, community members, and leaders. All had an opportunity to engage with, I think at that point there were 2 finalists, including myself, before the board made a final decision. And so I thought that that was a good process, but I don't suggest to you that I know what would be a best practice. I could not suggest that.
Okay.
Here's a question from Pat Cotham, who starts off with, Mr. Green, thank you for participating today on this webinar. And her question is, would you ever consider being a school superintendent again? Now, if you want to do a one-word answer, that's fine, or you can expound on it.
Thank you so much for that question. I so enjoyed my time as being a superintendent. And so one thing that you heard me say earlier is I don't say I'll never do a job again. Yeah, given how I ended up being superintendent in Guilford County. So, I am so enjoying what I'm doing currently. And so it's not something that I'm looking to do, is the way that I would probably best answer that question. I'm enjoying what I'm doing now. Feel like there's lots more I would like to do in this role. And so it's not a job that I'm looking to do.
Okay, so that sounds sort of like, no, but the door isn't closed.
Yeah, I've learned not to close doors. I've learned not to close doors just because you just never know what life is going to bring to you. And as I say, my path is being directed by someone other than myself. So, so don't close the door, but as I say, really enjoying what I'm doing right now.
Okay. And also from Sheila Etheridge Bodie or Bodie, one of those two is right. Okay. Who says that there weren't many mentors to encourage her during her time as a paralegal. Is it too late for me at 79 years old to go to law school? And she's, and she also goes on to say, LOL, and thanks so much for sharing your life experiences.
Yeah. So, I don't think it's ever too late, Miss Bodie, to go to law school. And so I would encourage you to do that. I think back to my mother, who, so she was a nurse in New York and then also helped run family businesses, but always wanted to be a teacher. And so when my father passed away, after we moved to Georgia, she wasn't in her 70s at that point, but she was certainly, much older than the college students. But she went back to college and graduated. A really neat sort of family story, but she graduated from Mercer University the same year that my brother graduated from 2-year college at the time, Lees McRae, and I graduated from high school. And so I look to her as someone who can go back to school at a later age and do it. And so age is yet but a number. And so I would say it's not too late to go back now. And law school is so much about law school is about learning. And so, I would suggest to you that if you're interested in just continuing to learn, then law school, I think, provides a great opportunity to do that. Obviously, it also can open up a whole profession as well, but just the experience of law school, I think, would be phenomenal. But you get nothing but 2 thumbs up on that. for me.
So now, a quick question, when you took over the Guilford County area, you took it over when it was 3 separate systems.
No, sir. It had already merged. So it
It
merged.
merged in your county, okay.
Yeah, so it merged in 1993. So I had clerked in 91, 92 in Greensboro, and so it was going through those sort of merger discussions at that point. It officially merged in 93, and so by the time I became superintendent, it was about 15 or so years after the merger.
And you, if it was still broken up, you would have taken the job, I think.
Yeah, I had never thought about that. That's a great question. That's a great question. I've never really thought about what I would have done had this districts not been merged at the time that I took it over.
Oh, okay.
And from another of our attendees, which areas of focus do you think are most important for improving quality of life in Charlotte today?
Yeah, so great question. And there are a number of things that I could lift up. But as it turns out, I believe that the priority areas that the foundation has for our state level systemic change turn out to be the areas that I would probably lift up as areas for improving the quality of life in Charlotte. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of those areas is public education. And so I would certainly lift that up as an area as a priority area for improving the quality of life in Charlotte, as well as throughout the rest of the state. I would certainly lift up, we have something we call social and economic justice area, which has a number of different things underneath it, including some economic self-sufficiency issues, certainly some focus on things like criminal justice, and so that sort of sub area, if you will, I think is that category. I would certainly lift up as something very important to improve the quality of life in Charlotte. And then finally, our other two areas, just for the sake of completeness, are something that we focus on: issues around democracy and issues around the environment. And I believe both of those provide fertile ground for things to do that can improve the quality of life in a place like Charlotte-Mecklenburg as well.
Okay. And one more from Roderick Hinton, who is, like I said, obviously very curious. I understand that reading novels is a passion for you. What are you reading presently?
Yeah, so I do enjoy reading and reading lots of different types of books. Right now I'm reading Memoirs of a Geisha. I pick up lots of books and read lots of different things. Just sort of reflecting back on the last few books that I read, things like Crying in H Mark, to reading a book, How the Word is Passed, which is nonfiction. So many names and titles are just sort of crossing my mind. But those, the book that I'm reading now is Memoirs of a Geisha.
Okay. And another question. Would love your insight on pursuing a career in philanthropy. What are your thoughts for someone entering the workforce / in college, someone mid-career or late career who would be transitioning in? And the same person is asking, better yet, which areas of focus do you see making the most significant impact today?
Yeah, so I certainly think the sector, the philanthropy sector, is an amazing sector to join, and there, to me, are many different opportunities and ways to come into this sector. So for many folk, there are opportunities like within our organization, we call them program officers, where they might be over or manage a particular portfolio of grantees. And they have particular knowledge and expertise in that area. So for example, you heard me mention earlier that one of our priority areas is public education. So if we have someone who has a program officer who would fill that position would have deep knowledge in that area. And so you can then see, if you sort of think about philanthropy, really covering the gamut. So you heard a little bit about what Z. Smith Reynolds does, at least with our state level systemic change, but you can imagine then that there are foundations that focus on any number of different, like we call it our sister foundation, KP Reynolds Charitable Trust, for example, focuses a lot on health related issues and social determinants of health. And so if that's your area of interest, that might give you a particular into a particular foundation. So I say all that to say, see what your interests are, see where look back and think about where your level of expertise may be, and those might give you opportunities to enter into the profession.
Okay, that is that's all of our questions from our attendees. They had a bunch, and we appreciate you answering all of them. And is there anything that maybe we did not necessarily cover that you would like folks to know? We already know now that you love reading, and even things that don't necessarily look on the surface like they would match up in terms of education and law and philanthropy. There are links if you look closely enough. So what may we have missed that you would like folks to know?
Yeah, I don't know that you necessarily missed anything. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I do, like to always lift up my wonderful wife. I did mention her earlier. I'm blessed to 29 plus years that we've been married, and then we have two wonderful children. Who were educated in part in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools and then in Guilford County schools. And I believe they're both doing well. And so thanks to all of the folks who help educate them. But no, I don't know that there is, I've had the great fortune of having now 3 amazing and different careers. And so, I would say that don't tie yourself down. That would be my advice. Don't make a decision early in life that this is all you're going to do, because you might actually be foreclosing tremendous opportunities to do other things. And so I'm glad that others looked at me and saw beyond me just being a lawyer, because I think I would have had a tremendous career as an attorney, but my life has been so enriched by being a school district administrator and now being in the world of philanthropy as
well. Mo, I want to thank you, and all of us want to thank you for sharing your time with us today. One closing point that I want to ask you in terms of legacy. You've lived a rich life, but what do you want to leave? As we all got to leave this place, but what do you want to leave in your own mind back as something that you feel proud mostly of, that will be carried on? That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. So that's a great question. I mean, that's a tremendous question. It's always been one that I have struggled with answering because I don't know that I think about it that way. I mean, um, the hope is that the world will be a better place and that I will have had just whatever insignificant to significant part in making the world a better place. But I don't think about legacy. I leave that to others. Yeah, I don't think about what I'm proud. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm proud of the folk that I got to work with who did tremendous things. I got to be a cheerleader for, as opposed to me doing something independently. So it's a tough question. It's a great question, but I struggle with answering.
Great answer. Great answer. Again, we appreciate your engagement with us with this conversation. I deeply enjoyed it. I hope everybody else did as well. And thanks again. I'm turning it back over to the host who fell asleep, but now they came back to close us out.
Well, thank you. We really enjoyed hearing from you this morning, Mr. Green. Thank you so much for your contributions to the community. Just for those who are attending, just want to let you know some of the past C-suite conversations we've had this year. They are on the slide deck there. Please go ahead and visit us online at the Charlotte Post, tcppc.com, C-suites for previous recordings there. We had Chris Jackson, CEO, President with Goodwill, Southern Piedmont, Thomas Scythe, President, North Carolina Community College, Gene Woods, CEO, Atrium Health, Fred Whitfield, President of Charlotte Hornets, Tunde Satunde, President of Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, and Keith Cockrit, President of Bank America Charlotte. And now we add to our list Mr. Maurice Green to our speakers for this year. So recordings are available on our website. And from here, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Green. That was very insightful. Enjoyed your conversation. Excuse me, on the screen, we have our information. Please go by and check us out on our websites or call us up if you have some questions or want to donate or do some sponsorships. We have all that available. And you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I would like to thank our presenter, Mr. Mo Green. And I would also like to thank our team. And we wish everyone a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and see you in the new year.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.